So in this video, I sit with Darren and we rehash the incident on the Dempster, where one of our riders went off the road and was medevaced out. This is the sum total of the trip from Calgary to Tuktoyaktuk and back. The yellow star shows where the incident happened and just how remote that location is. This is the bike after it went along the side of the embankment and into the trees. And the yellow is the path the bike took as it was going off the road. It happened on a very straight segment of road at about 4 in the afternoon. We'll talk about that. The bike touched the loose gravel at about the red arrow and traveled for almost 100 meters to where it stopped. What was that day like, though? Well, the night before, we had camped and were in our tents by 2 in the morning. We were up at about 8 o'clock in the morning, so we only had about 6 hours sleep. Packed up, left at about 10 in the morning, got to Eagle Plains, had lunch at about 1 o'clock, traveled on to the Arctic Circle, 2 o'clock, on to the Northwest Territories border, 3 o'clock, and an hour later, we had the incident. And the question is, why? It was a perfectly straight road segment.
Debriefing.
Some debriefing, especially given that we had the incident on the Dempster.
Mm-hmm.
There's a group of us, 6 of us headed up there, and we ended up with 5 of us on the Dempster part of the trip. Let's talk about people going up there and what sort of criteria you got to look at for skill sets.
Having some off-road experience is pretty good, and I think our group did.
And also, it's the length of the trip. I mean, we're talking about a trip from Calgary up to, Tuktoyaktuk, which is, roughly 4,000 kilometers away. So there's a lot of days driving just to get there, and a lot of hours driving per day. And that's
also, I think, in your pre-trip planning, the expectation of how long you have, are there time limitations, and that determines if you got to make a mile or if you can, take your time and kind of snoop around as you go up there.
I think the other thing is we really didn't have a team leader. We weren't on a group ride that was prepared for us.
Yeah, no, I think everybody felt responsible for themselves, yet there was the group dynamic that we were all looking out after each other too.
I think an improvement would be we could all check in with each other, quite frequently, just to make sure that we're all checking in, because we probably didn't have a system
as we're traveling.
Yeah, every hour or 2 hours, right? Just checking in.
And specifically for the Dempster trip, you've got the first half is all pavement, the second half is off road. Checking in on pavement when you're flying down the road where there's no or very limited hazards, checking in would be a challenge, I think.
Yeah, that's for sure. As long as you're not driving till 10 o'clock at night, which was, we did several times, right?
Mm-hmm. Other things you got to think about is, that to me, it's how are you in the journey itself with your camping, the weather, bugs, sun, sweat, no showers, cold rivers.
Well, for sure, just to get to the Dempster, you're close to 4 days of travel just to get to the start of it, right?
Right. And
depending on the group and whether you're camping, traveling, doing lots of kilometers in a day. So
we had luxury. We could make a mile. We didn't have packs on our bikes.
That's right. We had a supply truck with us that carried most of our gear. So when we normally carry about 100 pounds of gear per bike, we're now just carrying
us.
Yeah, and
so 30 pounds, more than 100 pounds.
30 pounds of gear. Right? Most of us were carrying a toolkit, compressor, and first aid kit, and I think that was about it. So
some bit of snacks and water.
Yeah, so we were good that way, but we were tenting on the way up there, and we had a couple of late nights, particularly the night before we had the incident. I think we camped at about 2 in the morning by the time we crawled into our tents.
Right.
And we probably got up at about 8 the next morning because we had left at about 10. So we didn't get a whole lot of sleep. So I think that's important.
No, and then there's the mosquitoes, which are definitely up there that you got to be. Depends how much they bother you. If they bother you a lot, you're going to be bothered by them.
And I think the other thing about this trip was, a lot of motorcycle incidents can happen as a result of impairment. And so we're talking, drugs and alcohol at this point, right? And while we would have a beer with dinner, there was not a drinking thing. So I don't think that
was ruled out in ours, but it's definitely people need to know if you are camping and you're tired and those build up in those long days, and now a beer might treat you differently than it does when you're in your normal environment.
And especially if you're hungover. If you were hungover and trying to do this trip, that would make it really difficult. It would be not the best idea. Then you want to make sure that your bike is ready for this. And so what are the types of things do we do?
You've got to have all the spare parts for your bike. You've got to have already gone over your bike, that it's running when you show up for the trip. There will be a tire change on your trip, so have that. And then when you're riding, you'll want to know if you want to change tire pressure for road conditions.
Which a lot of us did for...
And you guys with your fancy bikes, all these new bikes have all this...
Enduro mode.
Elemental P.
Yeah.
Switch this to this road and you won't get wet or whatever happens.
Yeah, so being familiar with your bike, I had an incident on the Dempster where my bike was flashing a red light at me constantly, and I didn't know what it meant. But what it turned out to be was I had a low tire pressure, and I continued driving it with heavy weight, and I ended up with a blowout and virtually almost crashed because I was just hoping that flashing light would go away as I crested the hill. Right. And sure enough, the light did go away because I was no longer losing traction until all of a sudden I had the blowout. And so knowing your bike is pretty important.
Black electrical tape does fix that light flashing too.
Yes,
you can always cover it.
You could hide that for sure. Lots of things can happen to you on a trip, and weather is one of them that could lead to an incident, but I'm not sure weather was a factor in this.
Not in our trip. We had really perfect roads. A couple days of a little bit of rain, but I don't think it just kept the dust down, really.
Yeah, so...
weren't slippery.
Our incident happened at about 4 o'clock at night when we're up in the far north of the Arctic Circle, and you've actually got daylight till where we were till about 11:30 at night.
Forever.
So and the sun is very high in the sky, so you're not driving into the sun. Dust didn't seem to be a problem. In fact, the first day we were on the Dempster, it was greasy, wet.
Yeah, it was raining.
And so that was
kept you nice and cool.
Learning experience for sure.
Yeah, but otherwise I think it wasn't there. I mean, there is places where they would have graders going down the road, so the gravel would be
loose and packed, and you might have
loose.
To cross that berm if there was traffic.
Yeah, little slight, I guess, ruts you could call it. And
so,
other times it was just nicely graveled road that was perfect.
With long views, so you could see oncoming trucks or vehicles for the most part. There's a couple of corners, but we were on a very straight part where we had our incident.
Right, yeah. But I think it could happen anywhere.
But the road itself, it's the Dempster Highway. It's known as one of the world's most dangerous roads, by the listing. It's very, very remote road.
I think it can be. I mean, it's like anything. If you don't get cooperation from the weather, it changes the travel.
Yeah, I've been on the road when it's been greasy, and it's been absolutely, terrifying.
Yeah, I think it would have been a completely different trip. And you've got to be prepared for that. You've got to now realize that you may not make your destination this time. You may just be camping, and you still got a long slog out of there. It's not a short trip.
Yeah, and I think that was part of making the different milestones. Hey, if we can make it to Tombstone,
Sure.
make it to Engineers, make it to Eagle Plains. Hey, we can turn back at the Arctic Circle. We could turn back at the Territories. We could turn back at the First Ferry. We could turn back. We could have been turned back almost anywhere.
Yeah.
But it's just a matter of the milestones and progressing forward where you can and retreating if you can't make it.
Well, the nice comfort from speaking for myself was the fact that you knew this trip so well. So anytime we discussed, you always said, well, if this doesn't work, there was always this other plan. I think that's important to have alternatives.
Yeah, it's good to have a backup
and
plan.
to know where you are on your route. Well, we did learn something there, and that was when there was an incident and it happened in the Northwest Territories versus going to Whitehorse, that they had to be evacuated to Yellowknife.
Yeah, for sure, that was something we had never thought
Did
of.
not know that.
But if you end up being, if you have the incident and they move you towards Fort McPherson, which is in the Northwest Territories side, and you become part of the Northwest Territories medical system, then they're going to want to hand you over to, if it's serious, they're going to want to hand you over to Yellowknife, which is their major city. And so as we were all kind of thinking about it, we were going, okay, they'll just medevac them to Whitehorse.
Is what we.
And for us,
Which
the
seems
medevac,
to be the shorter distance.
yeah, it was a cautionary thing. Our rider wasn't in serious condition, but we needed to look at everything, and we just all thought, boy, yeah, we'll just finish our trip. It's going to be a little bit of time. They'll get them back to Whitehorse. We'll hook up in Whitehorse. But no, they took them to Yellowknife, which from where the incident was a 2,500 kilometer trip around past Whitehorse.
Yeah.
Past Whitehorse. In fact, it was closer to Whitehorse than it was to Yellowknife for us. And so to get back to with your rider, that would have been a real challenge. But where we had the incident, the road itself was probably 12 meters wide.
Yeah.
It was hard packed gravel in the middle of it. But on the sides, it looks like the trucks had just dropped fresh gravel, or nobody traveled there.
Right, but I also think between the two, it's not just a one-lane highway, so there does seem to be a center rut as well, or center loose gravel, ever so slightly. So as you're traveling, you do have a tendency to want to obviously stay to your side of the road. You have plenty of room, but there's concentration required for long durations.
And here's one of the things, going back to the communication. We had the different riders in the group. We have fast riders. I was happy to go as a back rider with the supply
and photographer riders.
Yeah. So we had different people with different things happening, all traveling at different speeds. Yeah. And we were very fortunate in the place that we had the incident that one of us saw him go off the road and over the embankment, the ditch, where there was so loose gravel, nobody would travel there. You would never see the rider, and he was down into the trees.
Right.
Now, I happen to know the rider, stayed resting there for a period of time, but before they were comfortable to move, kind of done some preliminary assessments, and I actually believe the rider would have crawled up the embankment on their own at some point later on. Mm-hmm. But for the most part, if people are taking off down the road and you don't know, if you're not checking in every 10 kilometers or so, it becomes a more complex issue, because if it happens between you're starting the Dempster and Eagle Plains, most of the bikes barely have enough fuel to make Eagle Plains.
Right.
If you have to backtrack and ride 15 kilometers looking for a rider and then redo that 15 kilometers, you are not going to make it.
Things can get epic in a hurry.
Yeah.
And I think that's the one thing that we certainly could have improved on, is maybe staggering our riders and having a communication system that lets us know that you are okay and the person behind you is still, you've had some visual sight of that person. And when that chain is broken, it has to be known. and then you'd have a whole, because like you said, you're lucky that we saw our incident. I don't know how you would have found it, because I know when we were coming back to pick up the bike, it was hard to find it, even though we knew right where it was.
And nobody wanted to ride in that loose gravel to see.
Yeah,
So had
along
we
the
been
side.
patrolling back and forth looking for the rider, you wouldn't want to necessarily ride there.
Yeah.
The other thing on communications is we had 2 spots with us.
Mm-hmm.
However, one spot ended up in Whitehorse because our rider was working on his bike, and we had one spot with us. But spots help you in the case of an emergency. They don't
Yeah.
help you communicate
Communication amongst the group.
amongst the group. So there was a cell phone coverage about 3
Right.
kilometers from the incident. So we're able to call ahead to the riders that had moved farther ahead. But nobody thought to check their cell phones.
Right.
It was in fact because we got a message to the RCMP through people coming through that the group up front knew that something had happened in behind us, right? And then everybody mustered and got there. And we were lucky that there was a health and medical center in Fort McPherson,
Sure.
which was, let's say, roughly 45 minutes away, but there was a ferry crossing, and the RCMP stopped the ferry, or made sure the ferry was there for when we returned to get our rider there.
Right.
Went to the medical clinic, which had excellent service, but it was probably a nurse practitioner, or somebody
Yeah, I
highly
think,
qualified nurse, but they were trying to get information from emergency room doctors that were quite
Yeah.
busy as to what are the next steps.
Yeah, and it did seem like it took them a long while to get in queue to get the information.
I think we must have been there about 4 hours.
And
5
there
hours.
could have been, because there was another emergency that doctors were attending to. We don't know the situation there
Yeah.
at all.
The other thing, we had talked about having a list of everybody's contact information and sharing it to your partners as well.
Right.
So had you called back to Calgary to your partner,
Yeah,
they could have fanned out the phone call with the information as necessary.
Right.
But you know
And
what?
there we could have learned too, because I know we all had each other's contact, but we didn't have our significant others or relative contacts.
And in our case, the rider was from the US. And so there's medical insurance things
Right.
about that. And while you might wear a medical bracelet for specific conditions,
Right.
knowing some of your history is probably quite good. In terms of, blood, whatever it is, it could be your blood pressure, heart rate, could be previous incidents you've had that might trigger doctors to look for stuff. We should have all been carrying that on our person as being an information thing that we all say, hey, he's got something in his coat. It's got enough of his history. You can help deal with our guy.
And a lot of first responders do know to look for that on bikers. There's usually some sort of pocket somewhere that will have information. Yeah.
So, going back to our incident, I think the night before we might have had 4 or 5 hours sleep because we rolled into the campsite and we were set up by about 2 a.m. We would have got up at about 8.
Yeah,
And then
your
we-
rhythm
we-
gets thrown off with that full-time daylight.
Yeah, and
You
then
don't need to take a headlamp.
then a couple hours later, we're having breakfast, so that was
Right.
good. Then we stopped at the Arctic Circle. That was an hour later. An hour after that, we stopped at the Northwest Territories. Then we drove for a while. We stopped and carried on, and then it was shortly after that we had the incident. And the road was straight. The road was
Yeah.
perfectly straight, and we've got some pictures of where the road was. But there are a lot of things that could lead to, let's call it a distraction,
Sure.
where where
For
somehow you touch the gravel that's over at the edge of the road.
You end up not where you're supposed to be. And now, if the second that happens, I would say you're going to be out of control for sure, and you might be able to suggest to the bike where you'd like it to go. And that's kind of your best outcomes. So, especially at speed, we weren't going slow, and you end up in those places, because myself, I like to gawk around all over. I got my head on a swivel, and the scenery is beautiful up there. So definitely distracted by looking at some views.
And there's the distraction of the other riders are in front of you.
Mm-hmm.
They're moving, and I think we were doing about 80 kilometers an hour at the time.
I did.
So not terribly fast, pretty good road.
Fast for the shoulders. If you get caught in the shoulder, 80 K's.
Yeah, you
scary.
Yeah, I could barely pull over into that shoulder at 2-3 kilometers an hour without having my feet down paddling because of how loose the gravel was. It was like riding in loose sand.
Mm-hmm. I think, you want to control your feelings of success, because the whole way there, it's just, wow, things you've never seen. You just keep building on yourself. Man, I can go faster. I can take this corner a little bit more aggressive, but you do have to keep things definitely in your control. Each one will have a different tolerance for that.
Like every kilometer, you're getting closer to the end point, right? Because there was no going beyond the Arctic Ocean, right? So there was an end point, and it was now
exciting.
It was now clicking down. We're like 400 kilometers away, so you've got the whole bit of a terror at the beginning of, I've heard so much about this highway, and then you've got the euphoria and the excitement about, hey, there is a weather window here. Mm-hmm. Hey, we're making
Let's
it.
Go.
This is good.
And the closer you get, you're like the horse running home. You all want to get there first, and you want to keep up with everybody. And so there's a lot of distractions that can pull you away from just concentrating on your ride.
And then if you hit some loose gravel or greasy mud, your bike can just come out from underneath you. Doesn't matter. And probably if you're in a position you're able to stand up quickly, that
would help.
That could help, but you might be just throwing your legs out to the side, trying to maintain balance, which in loose gravel is probably not a good thing.
The worst thing you could do, but
I've certainly been in greasy situations where the bike just came out from underneath me, right? Yeah. And it does.
But the thing is, also, I think when you're doing a big trip like that, you got to be prepared. If there's so many things that could go bad at that situation, with bike damage, person damage, evacuation, getting a hold of people. Just there's a lot of potential problems. We
outfitted that particular bike with brand new knobby tires, the TKC 80s. They're a phenomenal knobby tire. They're like a 50-50 tire.
They were on the wrong bike. I had to put that shot in there.
Okay, but let's look at that, because that bike normally has a 190 rear tire, and you can't get a knobby in that size, so you got a 180. But a lot of us are riding on like a 150 knobby tire, right?
Yeah.
And maybe the narrower tire in gravel is better than a wider flat tire.
The most important thing though in this next bit, ride your own ride.
Yeah.
Don't ride anybody else's ride.
Remember, it's your ride, your vacation. Whatever you are on the road, make that your road. If it's a rut, make the rut your road. If it's the loose gravel, make that your road.
Yeah, because the road conditions, so we know a lot of single vehicle motorcycle accidents happen because going too hot into a corner.
Yeah.
But then the next is probably road conditions changing on you. And while we were, aware, sometimes it can happen pretty suddenly.
Oh, it does. It goes south in a second. But you can learn so much from that. So I think those are also good experiences.
And that's the idea here, I think, is, I can travel with a group and I can follow somebody, but every time I'm following somebody and the road conditions are poor, whether it's, a steeper hill or loose gravel or muddy, I always go, why is the other person able to go so fast and have so much skill and confidence, and why does my bike feel like it's wobbling? Yet we might be both traveling at 80 kilometers an hour, and I could lead the same section, and I'm now leading at 90 kilometers an hour because it's comfortable. What I find when I'm behind other riders is I'm not riding my own ride anymore. I'm now riding their ride a bit, and my view starts to be on them a little bit more. I might be looking for signs of poor, hey, the road's getting bad. Am I getting a warning from brake lights or something? But now everything I approach, I seem to be approaching faster because I'm not in my own zone. I'm trying to be in their zone.
Right, and it's looking like they're handling it quite well. So I would say I have a tendency to do that with the intention of trying to get in front of them. But you can tell where their bike is bouncing or how it's behaving, and then you can choose to follow that path or pick a different one.
Okay. Anyway, I think we kind of
I
covered
think
a lot of it.
It's really, you're not going to be prepared for everything, but as long as you've tried to think of most things, I think you'll find success.
Okay, and now, even though we don't have it in front of us, let's talk about a little bit of the video of what we saw, because I'll be this video will be in there, right? So with the video, it's kind of showing walking the route that the bike looks like it took,
Right.
and it's hard to tell whether there are braking points on here or whether just the weight of the bike disturbing the gravel makes it look like it was braking or just or whatever. But the first distance, as you're approaching to the embankment, and the bike is virtually somewhat out of control, and it's continually moving toward the embankment. That was about 2.5 seconds.
Right.
And then,
It's not very long.
which is not very long, and then the next part is going down the embankment, and then there's that big bush there. So I'm sure a lot of the focus is, I better stay above that bush more than almost anything else. And
Sure, I think you're going to try and save your bike. You're going to try and get back up on the road, but there is a point.
and then coming down to the bottom, it really looked like it was going to be driving along the willows and going whap 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 beside the willows, but there was one big rock there.
Right.
And it looks like that rock
Quick stop. Quick stop.
Yeah, turned the bike 90 degrees and just ejected the rider.
Right. Yeah, and that it just happens so fast that I don't know the speed. It's speed.
And I think
Always speed.
Yeah, here's the thing. I think we need to add is, we were at the medical center. We were all anxious. We thought they were going to release him to us to take to Inuvik, and we would have driven him straight to Inuvik
In the truck.
in the truck. But we were still chomping at the bit because we needed to cross that ferry at 11:30 at night before it shut down, because we wanted to be on the other side of the ferry. And they said, we're going to medevac your rider. We're going to fly him up to Inuvik. And we figured, okay, we'll catch him in Inuvik the next morning. We got up early, got to Inuvik.
Missed him by about a half hour, I think.
Yeah, and they flew him to Yellowknife already. So now we're trying to figure out, okay, well, we'll finish our trip because he's going to be in Yellowknife under care, so we're not too concerned. And then we circled around back and, got up to where we were going, came back, long night, loaded up the bike, got ourselves to Dawson City, sourdough cocktail and all, because he was still in Yellowknife. And then we knew the next day he was going to, on his own, fly to Whitehorse.
Fly to Whitehorse, yeah.
So that was the target of our trip, was fly to Whitehorse. And here's the amazing thing to me.
Yeah.
He got to Whitehorse. He's from like Denver, Colorado. Got his brother with us with the supply truck. And I thought that was going to be the last we saw them.
Yeah, no, he was not. He was in for the whole ride.
So we went for the rest of the holiday.
Yep.
He didn't ride his bike then. We had the bike loaded in the trailer. It needed work anyway.
I don't know if the bike could be.
Yes,
in.
yeah. But he came with us for the next 5 days.
Rescued me when my fuel pump went.
Yeah, so it
Came back.
It was phenomenal. He came back. I think he was a little sore, but my God, we had some fun on the way home.
We sure did.